Release the Kraken!
Welcome back, fellow game designers. In our last episode, we went ahead and created our level transition. So we have our levels here, and if we hit start, I get the start button and jump into the next level, and that all works really good. In this one, I want to make our level transition setup a little bit more robust. So let's go ahead and not waste time and just dive right in. For the fun of it, I want to set up the option to specify which level we're going to be transported to by name. So I'm going to jump in to my code here, and we have the option to use the same actual function, but change the signature. The signature is what goes inside the parentheses. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to grab this, so from brace all the way through the title here, copy it, and I'll just go down and I'll paste it here. So it's this whole new spot. Right now it's a red squiggle. I'm going to take away this signature, and I'm going to instead, I'm going to say string, and then I'll call this scene name. All right. And now we'll get a bit of a change. We're using this local version of scene name, so we're going to have to make sure that we're very specific. So I'm going to come down in here, and instead of checking the index, I no longer have to worry about being in the wrong index. I can instead come up to here and just pass in the scene name. So I'll just remove the index here. I'll just clean that up a little bit. Now check this out. If I do it this way, I get two options. If I go up to my start, now check this out. I can come over here, I can change this, go down to Game Manager, and now I have another option. I can check it by integer, or I can check it by string. If I grab by string, I'll grab my start over here, and then I can just specify the scene name by typing it in. So let's say I'll do level 3. And then I'll hit play, hit start, and it drops me into my 3rd level. And you might think, well, why would you ever want to specify by name? Well, let's say we create our game win screen or our game over screen. It might be scenes 4 and 5 or whatever, but then you'd have to remember what numbers they are. And that's not always easy to do. If you have like 30 levels, you're like, well, is it level 4 or 5, whatever, you can just call the name. So by having the option to call the name whenever we call the function, we can go directly to the thing. But we do need to make sure that the name actually exists. So we're going to make a safety in here. We're going to go through the list, and if the name does not match any name on our list, we will exit. So to do that, I'm going to create a for loop. So a for loop is just a loop that walks through each individual item inside of our array, or it iterates through the array. So I'm going to say for, parentheses, and I'll say int, because for loops only take integers. And I'll say I for my iterator, 0. So we're starting at 0, and we're going to say I is less than our scene name dot length. And then we also want to do I++. Now, very important, we're actually not wanting to talk to this scene name. We want to talk to this scene name. And there's a wonderful built-in operation for that. So since this one only exists in the scope of this function, we can specify we want to use this .scene name. And what that does, this says use this one, the one that belongs to the class. Okay? This one here only belongs in scope of this signature. And we don't have to worry about it being a negative number, because it's always going to be positive in the scope of this. And what we're going to do here is inside here, we're going to go ahead and add in some braces. And then I will just move this inside here. And then just before we actually run this line of code, we'll say if this dot scene name, and then brackets I, and we're going to see if it's equal to scene name. Awesome. And then once we end up catching the scene name, we're going to go ahead and just exit this loop, because let's say the name happens at like the first time we run the loop. We don't want to run through any additional instances of this loop because that would just slow things down. So we're going to exit this by wrapping this in braces here. And then at the end of this, we'll just say return. And that's going to jump out of this. It's going to go back up to the main function and then let the game proceed. So that gets us out of here. However, if this runs all the way through and does not find our particular scene name, we want to throw an error. And we want to have some sort of way of knowing that it ended up failing. So we're going to throw an exception. So at the end of this loop, I'm going to come down here and you're going to put a comment. We're going to say throw an error if level does not exist. So throwing is really easy. We say throw, and then we want a new exception, and then we have some parentheses here. So system, that uses our using statement, system.collections. This is fine inside of here. We could just use the standard system, but what that does, because I'm not in the system namespace, it does specify, hey, you're going to be calling system.exception. If we want to have without the system prefix here, we can come up to our using statements and just add in system. So we'll say using system, semicolon. And then if I come down here, I no longer have to call system. I can just call exception, and this will run, because this is being called inside of the system namespace. And you can see that it's highlighted. These ones are kind of gray because I don't really have anything that I'm using right now. I could actually just remove these, but I'm going to leave them in. But anyway, that's how the namespaces work. That just kind of tells us whichever. But we're throwing the exception, and then inside here is the message we want to pass to the console in the event that this runs and ends up failing. So we're going to go ahead and throw in some quotes. And it's important to have this message be as clear as possible. If you've ever debugged code, you know that the debugging information is like reading stereo instructions. It's kind of terrible. So I just want to let them know that if they're ever using the change name function with the string pass, that it didn't get the right scene. So I'll say level name specified in change scene string does not exist. Okay, so level name specified in change scene string does not exist. And you can make this prettier or better if you want to have a more succinct thing. I think this is pretty clear. And if we run it, we'll come back in. And of course I can run this. It works. Yay. Let's check what happens if we pass in a name that doesn't exist. So I know I have level 3. Let's do level 10. Or 19. Sure, 19. It's a level way outside of our scope, right? I can pass that in. And if I hit the start option, it throws an exception. It says, hey, the level name specified in change scene string does not exist. We've made our own error. We've told us that it broke. We didn't actually go anywhere, and it exited. Awesome. So now we have two different ways of calling a function, and we can report an error if one breaks. All right, I'm going to go ahead and just clear the log there. And of course, save. Now jump back in, and now we want to have a way of changing the level whenever we destroy all the enemies, or if we lose all of our lives. So let's go ahead and do that. In here, I'm going to make a new private function, or private variable. So I'll say private. Let's do an int, and this is going to be lives. And I'll set it to 3. I'll also do another private, and this is going to be an int, and I'll call this one scene index. I'll set the default to 0. And if ever we're using the scene index, we will of course want to update this, that way we're always on the right scene. So right off the bat, since I have this, I'm going to scroll down, and I'll just make an update to any of my functions here. this one, if I ever pass in a scene index, I want to make sure that that's the index that gets updated. So I'm going to go ahead and just change this just a little bit. And then I'll just make some spaces here, wrap this up. And since I'm using the word scene index, I will go ahead and just update this so it matches. This is pretty local, so I don't have to worry about it being too bad. So scene index here, this one is also scene index. And this is a scene index. So if this passes, we want to then update this .scene index, and we'll say that that is our scene index. And then we can use either one here, because both of them at this point would be the same number, but just for consistency's sake, I will then move on to this .scene index. Now, just like we did with our previous function, if the scene is not valid, we need to throw an exception. So I'm going to say else here, and then I will just throw. So I'm going to come down and copy my throw. I'll pass it into here on this else. And then I'll do an exception, level specified, in the change scene int. Hope you don't mind the little bit of noise. That's my automatic cat box. So level index, I'll do scene index specified in the change scene int does not exist. All right, so that should be pretty good. I can save that. I'm now going to make one more version of our change scene or change level. I'm going to go ahead and I'll do another public void change level, and then braces. And then in here, we can have unity. If let's say if we don't call a level, it'll just figure out what current scene we're on and then update it. So I'm going to say scene index plus plus, and then I'll update the scene. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then I will check to make sure that we're not going to be outside the bounds of any array. So I'll say if scene index, and we're going to do something very similar to here. First off, we're going to check to see if it's less than a length and also greater than 0. So I can copy this, like that, and get rid of this extra one. So if our scene index is less than the length of our scene name and it's greater than 0, then we can continue on to the next part. I'll hit enter, and I'll have to get my braces and enter. Now this here is actually a two-part step. I'm updating this, and then on the next frame, on the next step within the frame, I am going to be checking this. But actually, we don't want to make any changes to this value until we're sure that we're allowed to go there. Because if we specify a number that's outside our boundary, it could really mess up our code later. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take in a new integer. So I'm going to say int, and then I'll do scene index. Now I'm not giving it a signature this time. I'm just building one inside of here. Okay. And then I'm going to pass that to this .scene index. And what this is going to do is it's going to create a temporary variable that has the current scene index. That way I don't modify the original, but I have that number somewhere else. And then in here, I'm going to update that scene index. So I'm going to update it just before I do any math on it. Okay. So I'm going to say update the scene index. Make sure that we're not outside the array and that we're bigger than 0. And then we can do this stuff right here. I'm going to copy that here. Boop. So this part is okay. So once we've checked it and we've passed it, we can update the current one to the new one. We can go to the new level. All right. If this fails, we then throw our exception. So this exception here, we'll do an else. Make sure we have that in there. And then I'll just tab these over. And then I'll change this to scene index specify and change scene. And this is going to be the one without any signature. So this is going to be empty. Does not exist. Now the advantage of this one is whenever I call it and I don't specify anything, I'm just telling the game, hey, just go to the next scene. And that's what this is going to do here. It's going to look at the current scene, find out where we're at, and then go to the next one without any hooting and hollering. I don't have to specify. So I can save this here, and we can test it out to make sure it's going to work. So I'll go to my start, scroll down, I'll change this one, and now I have a change scene with an integer, one with a string, and one with nothing. So if I choose the nothing, it's going to automatically go to whatever the next scene is. So let's go ahead and hit play. And I'll hit start, and it should drop me into the very next scene. Awesome. So we know that works. So we have 3 different methods with the same name that we can call, and if we put a different signature in there, we'll get a different overload option. And that's going to do it for this video. In the next one, we're going to take a look at how to change the scene whenever we lose all of our lives or whenever there's no more enemies in the scene. So stay tuned, and I shall see you next time. Hey guys, thank you for checking out my channel. Misty and I both thank you. If you enjoyed that video you just watched, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe. Or if you want to support the channel, check me out on Patreon or pick up one of my books, Life and Times Down in Marton or The Guardian's Path of Ascension. Speaking of which, I'm converting The Guardians into a graphic novel / comic book series. Here is a sneak peek. My wonderful artist, Patrick, is doing a great job. I'm excited. I want to push this out as soon as possible. So definitely keep your ears and eyes open for that. I'll be making announcements as we get closer, and I'll post some shots of that as we go. And if you want to follow me on social media, you can check me out on Twitter. I guess now it's X. Who does that? It's BruceRF1 at Twitter, or at whatever the new thing for Twitter is. Anyway, hopefully see you there, and I'll see you guys next time.